Ian Spanning Gateway, Asia. Now let's go over orb, okay? Because it's important to see how these words correlate to each other, to us. Everything outside of us is a different way of seeing spiritually, not with our eyes necessarily. With our eyes, we're seeing the definition, but we're seeing spiritually how this word is used within us throughout our lives, okay? So orb is a noun. A orb is also a state of being, right? It is a thing. Looking at the root words, there's blind. Hold on, come think about that. Blind orb. Interesting. But looks like from Latin, orbis, referred in architecture. Okay, blind or blank window. Blank window. So that has to do with something about seeing. Wow. Okay, I'll be going over this stuff, just with you guys. Seeing in window, blind or blank window. Okay, it's a way of seeing. Or panel. Oh, that's wild. I was just showing the panel in the star map. OBS, that has to do with observation. So it's a state of, it's us observing a state of being, us observing an orb, which is a window. That's a certain type of covering. Blind also represents a certain type of covering. Interesting. A circle, right? Because we see how these things correlate with the church, the circle, the orb, a sphere, globe, a sphere surmounted by a cross. Oh, how interesting. That's another perspective of orb. Another perception is a sphere surmounted by a cross. Okay, the cross is very important because it identifies a whole lot of information, not just with a story. Let me see. I got to look on here. As a symbol of royal power. Wow. Royal, before we identify royal outside of ourselves and think of royalty, within different societies and time cycles, but royalty is also a state of being. We all have the ability to be royalty, but it identifies a particular status. So royal has to be defined. So before we define anything royal outside of ourselves, we should understand how that pertains to ourselves, right? Because you have to be in a condition, in a state of being royal, and that carries its own energetic field, its own information. So usually that identifying to some type of status. And if your containers, your forms is identified at that status of royalty, has to do with orb. Amazing. Okay. Because there's different, we can represent that in the star map. Everything. Okay. What else? A sphere of activity. Oh, so that shows us that there's information, energy happening inside within the window of the orb that usually we are blind to see unless we are aware and know how to look at it. A province, that also shows a location, okay? Where your location is geographically or individually. But it usually, I have to look up that word, but it usually has to do more with society. But I'm sure we can identify that to ourselves too. Anyways, rank, status. Oh, orb. A way to identify an orb is a rank or status. Wow. Not necessarily used that much these days, but the word doesn't change its energy. We just build. See how we continue on in words? We build onto this form. Let's see. Oh, in astrology, yes, because astrology is a study of the orb, okay? Astrology is a science to study the orb. This is not a belief system, okay? The sphere of influence or theology, the theology has to do with belief. We can know these things for ourselves, right? Because we're observing them right now. So if you're observing this video, then you're able to know this for yourself and observe yourself and come to your own conclusions, right? Okay, I said a sphere of activity. In astrology, I hope you can see. Circular in form, right? Circle, which the circle is the container of information, which we see the different signs. We use it in different ways. Okay. Planet represents the planet, stars, and house in a house. Or house, which we have houses in astrology, right? These are different orbs. I just showed that, I think, in a different video before this, how each one can be considered an orb, a church, and how these things correlate. Just depends on the names we use to call it, to identify it, or how it relates to us. Because we also have orbs. If we look at them that way, you have to be in that perception to see them as orbs. And you can't see them with your eyes like that. That's something you see spiritually. Because you can see how you are a container of information activity, right? You have your own activity, your own actions, okay? A period or revolution of time, okay? So an orb also represents time. How interesting. So we can correlate and understand that an orb is a container of all kind of information, right? Because we see how it's represented it's represented in many different forms within ourselves and within society and the universe. Because we live within the universe, we live within an orb, we live within a container, a house, or whatever. Okay, whatever you want to call it, but it's just a state of being, a state of existence, and we use these words to represent these things. So let's get into the visual, the spiritual representation of the orb.